My parents refused to watch my 4-year-old twins while I was being wheeled into emergency surgery because they were tailgating at a Taylor Swift concert, a concert I paid for entirely. My mother called me a nuisance and a burden. My sister accused me of faking a ruptured appendix for attention. So I hired an emergency nanny from my hospital bed, cut all their credit cards, and prepared to evict them from the house I own. My name is Sienna. I am 33 years old, and as a senior risk analyst, I know exactly how to neutralize a bad investment. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a toxic family who treated you like a walking ATM. Growing up in the affluent suburbs of Chicago, I was taught early on that family loyalty was paramount. But that loyalty only ever flowed in one direction. My parents, Harold and Margaret, demanded absolute devotion, yet offered nothing but criticism in return. I was the responsible one, the workhorse, the reliable bank account. My younger sister Amber was the golden child, forever excused from adult responsibilities. At 28 years old, Amber still relied on me to fund her lifestyle, a lifestyle our parents actively encouraged me to support. The reality of my position in the Wilson family hierarchy became terrifyingly clear on a rainy Tuesday evening. It started as a dull ache in my lower abdomen right after I picked up my 4-year-old twins Mason and Mia from daycare. By the time I managed to drive us back to my townhouse, the pain had escalated into a blinding, searing agony that left me doubled over on the kitchen floor. I could barely breathe. The room spun wildly, and a cold sweat broke out across my forehead. I knew instantly that something was catastrophically wrong. I managed to unlock my phone and dial for an ambulance. Within 15 minutes, the paramedics arrived, loaded me onto a stretcher, and allowed Mason and Mia to ride in the front with the driver. The fear in my children's eyes was the only thing sharper than the physical pain tearing through my gut. At Seattle General Hospital, the emergency room was a chaotic blur of fluorescent lights, shouting voices, and the sharp scent of antiseptic. A compassionate woman named Nurse Nora immediately took charge of my case. She guided the stretcher into a trauma bay, while gently instructing a hospital social worker to sit with my twins in the corner of the room. Mason and Mia huddled together on a plastic chair, clutching their coloring books, their small faces pale with terror. The attending physician examined me quickly. His face grew grim as he pressed down on my abdomen. The pain was so intense my vision went completely white for a few seconds. He ordered an immediate CT scan and blood work. 30 minutes later, he returned with a diagnosis that sent a chill straight down my spine. My appendix had ruptured. Peritonitis was setting in rapidly. The toxic infection was already spreading through my abdominal cavity and entering my bloodstream. I needed to go into the operating room immediately, or my organs would begin shutting down. Panic, pure and unadulterated, seized my chest, not for myself but for my children. I am a single mother. Their father walked away when they were barely a year old, unable to handle the responsibilities of parenthood, and moved across the country. I had built a successful career as a senior risk analyst to provide them with a beautiful, stable life. But in this exact moment, lying on a hospital gurney with a massive infection threatening my life, all my financial success meant absolutely nothing without an immediate support system. Nurse Nora leaned over the bed, her voice calm but urgent. "Sienna, we have the surgical suite prepped. The anesthesiologist is waiting, but we cannot take you in until we have a designated guardian to pick up your children. Hospital policy dictates we cannot keep minors in the emergency department unchaperoned while a parent undergoes major surgery. Do you have someone you can call?" I nodded weakly, my hands trembling as I reached for my phone on the bedside table. I had to call my parents. Harold and Margaret were my only local relatives. Despite our complicated, often toxic history, despite the years of emotional manipulation and financial exploitation, they were still my parents. They were Mason and Mia's grandparents. In a life or death crisis, I genuinely believed that blood would ultimately matter. I believed that the primal instinct to protect family would override their usual selfishness. I believed they would drop everything to make sure my children were safe while I went under the knife. I unlocked my screen and hit my mother's contact name, praying for a swift and comforting response. The phone rang 4 times before the call connected. Instantly, my ear was assaulted by the deafening sound of heavy bass, screaming crowds, and overlapping conversations. They were at the stadium. My mother Margaret answered the phone with an irritated huff, her voice barely audible over the chaotic background noise. "What is it, Sienna?" she demanded, not bothering with a greeting. "I am trying to find the luxury suite entrance, and your father is complaining about the parking situation. Make it quick." I gripped the phone tightly, fighting back a wave of nausea from the ruptured appendix. "Mom." I gasped out every syllable, requiring immense effort. "I am at Seattle General Hospital. My appendix ruptured. The infection is spreading. They are taking me into emergency surgery right now. I need you and Dad to come to the hospital immediately to pick up Mason and Mia." They are sitting in the emergency room, terrified. There was a brief pause on the line. I waited for the gasp of maternal concern, the sudden shift in tone, the immediate promise that they were on their way. Instead, I heard a long, exasperated sigh. "Are you kidding me right now, Sienna?" My mother said, her voice dripping with profound annoyance. "We are currently tailgating in the VIP parking lot at the stadium. Taylor Swift goes on stage in exactly 2 hours. We have been planning this night for months. You could not have timed this worse. You are being a complete nuisance and a burden right now." The words hit me harder than the physical agony in my abdomen. A nuisance. A burden. My organs were failing, my children were crying in a hospital corner, and my mother was annoyed that my medical emergency was interrupting her pre-concert drinks. "Mom, please." I begged, tears finally spilling over my eyelashes and tracking down my cheeks. "This is not a drill. The doctor said I could die if they do not operate immediately. The hospital will not take me into the surgical bay until someone claims the twins. You have to come get them." I heard a scuffle on the other end of the line, followed by the sharp, entitled voice of my younger sister, Amber. She had snatched the phone from our mother. "Seriously, Sienna?" Amber snapped, her tone radiating pure hostility. "It is my birthday weekend. You always have to make absolutely everything about you. We are about to walk into the stadium, and you decide to pull this stunt. You are probably just exaggerating a minor stomachache because you are jealous we are having a fun family night without you. Stop being a drama queen and just hire a babysitter." The sheer audacity of her accusation temporarily paralyzed my vocal cords. My mind, trained to process data rapidly, instantly recalled the exact financial footprint of the event they were currently attending. They were not just at a concert, they were at a concert that I had entirely funded. I paid $4,000 for each of those VIP tickets as a lavish birthday gift for Amber. I paid $800 for the luxury SUV rental they drove to the stadium. I paid for the catered tailgate food they were currently eating. I even paid the monthly bill for the very smartphone Amber was using to accuse me of faking a life-threatening illness. In the background, cutting through the stadium music, I heard a deep, familiar voice. It was DeAndre, Amber's husband. DeAndre was a hard-working, decent man who had always been out of place in our toxic family dynamic. "Amber, what is going on?" DeAndre asked, his voice laced with sudden concern. "Is Sienna okay? We need to leave. We need to get to the hospital right now." Before Amber could respond, my father's voice boomed through the phone, shutting DeAndre down completely. "Do not interfere," DeAndre Harold commanded harshly. "Stay entirely out of Wilson family business. Sienna is just being dramatic to ruin her sister's special night. She always does this. We are not leaving this parking lot." I lay on the hospital gurney, the phone pressed against my ear, listening to my family actively choose a pop concert over my life and the safety of my children. "Look," Sienna, Amber said, her voice returning to the receiver with cruel finality. "We are walking into the stadium now. They are scanning our tickets. Do not call this number again tonight. We will have our phones on airplane mode during the show. Figure it out yourself." The call disconnected. A sharp beep signaled the end of the conversation. I pulled the phone away from my ear and stared at the dark screen. The betrayal was so absolute, so profoundly grotesque, that it defied all rational comprehension. They were willing to let me die, and willing to let my 4-year-old twins be handed over to Child Protective Services rather than miss a concert that I had purchased for them. The dead silence emanating from my phone stood in stark contrast to the chaotic noise of the emergency room around me. Nurse Nora stood beside my bed, her hands hovering over the IV line. She had heard enough of the conversation through the phone speaker to understand exactly what had just transpired. Her face was a portrait of absolute horror and deep, aching pity. "Honey," Nurse Nora whispered, her voice cracking slightly. "Do you have anyone else? A neighbor, a friend? We need to get you into that operating room right now." I did not answer her immediately. I just stared up at the glaring fluorescent lights embedded in the ceiling tiles. Slowly, the hot tears that had been streaming down my face stopped completely. The frantic, desperate panic of an abandoned daughter vanished, replaced by a sudden, chilling calm. The emotional fog that had clouded my judgment for 33 years abruptly lifted. As the physical pain of the peritonitis burned through my body, my mind executed a flawless psychological pivot. The vulnerable, people-pleasing daughter died on that hospital gurney. In her place, the senior risk analyst woke up. In my profession, I am paid a very high salary to evaluate corporate portfolios, identify toxic assets, and eliminate financial liabilities before they destroy a company. For the first time in my life, I applied that exact same clinical, merciless framework to my own family. Harold, Margaret, and Amber were not my family. They were a catastrophic negative yield investment. They were a black hole of resources returning zero emotional dividends while constantly demanding more capital. I lay there and mentally audited the past 5 years of my life. I purchased the sprawling suburban home my parents currently lived in, holding the legal deed while they enjoyed the prestige of a wealthy neighborhood. I paid their property taxes. I paid their utility bills. I funded the joint credit cards they used to buy designer clothes and country club dinners. I subsidized Amber's lifestyle because she refused to hold down a steady job, claiming her creative spirit could not be constrained by a traditional schedule. I had been funding my own abusers. I had been paying them to disrespect me. The realization was not heartbreaking, it was purely illuminating. I had constructed a gilded cage for myself, assuming that my overwhelming generosity would eventually buy their unconditional love. But toxic people do not love the machine that dispenses their cash. They merely expect the machine to keep working, and they kick it when it malfunctions. My appendix was rupturing, releasing poison into my physical body, but my family had been releasing a much more dangerous poison into my life for decades. The medical doctors were about to surgically remove the infected organ from my abdomen. I realized with absolute icy clarity that I needed to surgically remove my family from my financial and emotional portfolio. There would be no more tears. There would be no more pleading for basic human decency. There would be no dramatic confrontations or begging for explanations. You do not negotiate with a toxic asset. You simply liquidate it. You cut the funding, you close the accounts, and you walk away. The monitors beside my bed began to beep more urgently, tracking my rising heart rate and dropping blood pressure. The infection was advancing. I had only minutes left before the medical team would be forced to intervene, regardless of protocol. I refused to be a victim of my family's negligence. I refused to let their callousness dictate the safety of my children. "Nurse Nora," I said, my voice shockingly steady and devoid of any previous panic. "Please give me exactly 2 minutes. I am going to solve this right now." She looked uncertain but nodded, stepping back slightly to give me space while keeping a close eye on the vital monitors. I opened the corporate concierge application on my phone. Because my job often required emergency travel and sudden long hours, I had a membership with an elite, highly vetted childcare agency based in Seattle. This was not a standard babysitting app. These were pediatric certified professionals, background checked by private security firms, available for high-level executives experiencing sudden crises. I quickly typed in my urgent request. I needed an emergency nanny to arrive at Seattle General Hospital within 20 minutes, retrieve my 4-year-old twins, drive them to my secure townhouse, and stay with them overnight. The premium cost for such immediate specialized service was $500 a night, plus a substantial dispatch fee. Without a second thought, I authorized the payment using my personal Black Card. The transaction processed instantly. Within 40 seconds, I received a confirmation notification featuring the profile of a highly rated professional named Beatrice, along with her estimated time of arrival. 14 minutes. I looked over at Mason and Mia. They were bravely coloring in their books, occasionally casting terrified glances in my direction. I used the last ounce of my physical strength to prop myself up on my elbows. Mason, Mia, I called out softly. They immediately dropped their crayons and rushed over to the side of my gurney. I reached out my hands, shaking slightly, and stroked their hair. Mommy has to go to sleep for a little while, so the doctors can fix my tummy. A very nice lady named Beatrice is coming to pick you up. She is going to take you home, order whatever pizza you want, and let you watch your favorite movies until you fall asleep. Mommy will see you as soon as I wake up. I promise. Mason hugged my arm tightly while Mia kissed my hand. We love you, Mommy, they said in unison. The purity of their love, so starkly different from the conditional exploitation of my parents, fortified my resolve. I signaled to Nurse Nora and showed her the confirmed nanny profile and identification details on my phone screen. The agency has verified her credentials. She will be here in 12 minutes to take custody of the children. You can prepare me for surgery now. Nurse Nora looked at the screen, then looked at me with a mixture of profound respect and sheer awe. You are an incredibly strong woman, Sienna, she said softly. Let us get you taken care of. The surgical team swarmed the trauma bay, unlocking the wheels of my stretcher. As they pushed me rapidly down the long, sterile corridors toward the operating theater, the overhead fluorescent lights strobed past my vision like a rapid ticking clock. I felt the familiar sting of the IV needle as the anesthesiologist administered the initial sedative. The heavy doors of the surgical suite swung open. The room was freezing cold and blindingly bright. The doctors transferred me to the operating table, adjusting the surgical drapes and positioning the oxygen mask over my face. I did not feel fear about the impending procedure. I only felt a cold, calculating determination crystallizing in my mind. As the heavy, numbing weight of the anesthesia began to pull me under into darkness, I finalized the first phases of my strategic plan. Step 1. Log into the banking portal and disable every single authorized user card currently in Harold, Margaret, and Amber's possession. Step 2. Contact my real estate attorney to begin the legal eviction process for the suburban house. Step 3. Revoke all access to the vehicles leased under my name. My mother thought I was a nuisance. Amber thought I was a drama queen. Harold told DeAndre to stay out of family business. They believed they could discard me at death's door and simply return to their luxury lifestyle funded by my hard work. They were about to discover the catastrophic consequences of treating their primary investor like garbage. I closed my eyes, and as the darkness completely consumed me, I made a silent vow. When I wake up, the Wilson family bank will be permanently closed. I woke up to the rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor and a throat so dry it felt like I had swallowed sand. The hospital room was dim, illuminated only by the sterile glow of medical equipment and the pale morning light filtering through the blinds. I tried to shift my weight, but a sharp stabbing pain in my abdomen quickly reminded me of the surgery. I took a shallow breath, letting my eyes adjust to the room. It was empty. The visitor's chair beside my bed, upholstered in cheap vinyl, was vacant. No flowers, no balloons, no worried parents hovering anxiously over their eldest daughter. The silence was deafening, a stark contrast to the chaotic terror I had felt just hours before when my appendix ruptured. Nurse Nora quietly entered the room, her soft-soled shoes barely making a sound on the linoleum floor. She checked my IV drip and offered a warm, empathetic smile. "Good morning, Sienna," she said gently, adjusting the blankets around me. "The surgery went perfectly. The doctor will be by shortly to discuss your recovery. How is your pain level?" "Manageable," I whispered, my voice rough. "The twins, did Beatrice?" Nurse Nora's expression softened even further. "Your children are perfectly safe. The nanny agency called an hour ago to confirm they had a wonderful evening with pizza and movies, and they are both still fast asleep in your home. The nanny left a detailed report on the portal. They are doing great." A profound wave of relief washed over me momentarily, eclipsing the physical pain. I closed my eyes silently, thanking the premium service I had paid for. My children were safe. That was all that mattered. "Do you want me to call your family?" Nurse Nora asked tentatively, her eyes darting to the empty visitor's chair. They haven't checked in since you went into surgery. No, I replied, my voice steadying. That won't be necessary. Nurse Nora nodded slowly, understanding the unspoken weight of my words. She checked my vitals one last time before quietly slipping out of the room. I reached for my phone, which had been placed on the small bedside table. The screen lit up with a barrage of notifications, mostly automated emails from work, and a few alerts from the nanny agency. There were 0 missed calls, 0 text messages, and 0 voicemails from my parents or my sister. I unlocked my phone and almost instinctively opened Instagram. The algorithm, always eager to show me what I was missing, immediately served up a post from Amber. It had been published just a few hours ago, right around the time I was being wheeled out of the operating room. The photo was a high-quality, perfectly lit shot taken from inside the VIP suite at the stadium. Amber was in the center wearing a glittering custom-made outfit that she had undoubtedly charged to one of my credit cards. She had one arm thrown around our mother Margaret, who was holding a glass of expensive champagne and beaming at the camera. Our father Harold stood on Amber's other side looking relaxed and jovial, wearing a limited edition concert t-shirt that I had purchased for him weeks in advance. The caption beneath the photo was a masterclass in passive-aggressive cruelty. Best night ever with my real family. So grateful for parents who actually know how to have fun and live in the moment. Nothing beats making memories with the people who matter most. I stared at the screen, the glare burning into my retinas. Real family. The people who matter most. The words were a deliberate, calculated insult designed to punish me for daring to have a medical emergency during Amber's birthday celebration. They were smiling. They were drinking champagne. They were posing for social media while their eldest daughter, the woman who had funded their entire luxurious evening, was having infected organs removed from her body. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel the crushing weight of rejection that usually accompanied my family's toxic behavior. The anesthesia must have burned away my remaining capacity for self-delusion, leaving behind only cold, hard facts. I zoomed in on the photo, examining the details with the critical eye of a risk analyst. The VIP lanyard around Amber's neck, the designer bag slung over my mother's shoulder, the premium drinks in their hands. Every single item in that frame, including the very presence of my family in that stadium, was a direct result of my financial labor. I had subsidized their happiness, and in return they had publicly discarded me. I took a screenshot of the post. I didn't save it to a folder labeled Family Memories. I saved it to a newly created folder on my phone titled Liabilities. This was not a family. This was a parasitic financial arrangement. They were a drain on my resources, returning 0 emotional support, 0 loyalty, and 0 respect. I had been making a terrible investment for years, confusing biological connection with genuine love. I locked my phone and set it back on the table. The tears that had flowed so freely in the emergency room were gone, replaced by a deep, icy resolve. The surgery had removed the infected tissue from my body, but the real rot, the toxic presence of my family, still needed to be excised from my life. I lay back against the pillows, staring up at the ceiling tiles. I needed a plan. I needed a meticulous, legally sound, and financially devastating exit strategy. The Wilson family had just enjoyed their last free ride. The Bank of Siena was officially closed. I had just finished dragging the screenshot into my new folder when a soft chime sounded from my phone. It was a text message. Not from my mother. Not from my sister. It was from DeAndre. Sienna, please tell me you are okay. I have been sick with worry all night. The surgery went well, right? I wanted to come to the hospital, but things got ugly here. Call me when you can. DeAndre, Amber's husband. He had always been the quiet observer in our family dynamic, the one who looked uncomfortable during my mother's tirades and my sister's tantrums. He worked hard as a physical therapist, a job that required genuine empathy, a trait entirely absent in the Wilson gene pool. He was a good man who had somehow gotten swept up in Amber's chaotic orbit. I typed back a brief but reassuring response. I am out of surgery and recovering. The twins are safe at home with a nanny. Thank you for checking on me, DeAndre. His reply was instantaneous. Thank God. I am so sorry about last night, Sienna. It was unacceptable. Before I could ask what he meant, my phone buzzed with an incoming call. It was DeAndre. I answered, keeping my voice low. DeAndre, I am okay. You don't have to apologize for them. I do, he said, his voice tight with barely suppressed anger, because I stood there and watched it happen. Sienna, the moment Amber hung up on you, I lost it. I told them we needed to leave the stadium immediately. I told them you could be dying. A hollow feeling settled in my chest. And what did they say? DeAndre let out a harsh, bitter laugh. Amber told me I was overreacting. She said you always pull these stunts to ruin her moments. I grabbed my keys and told her I was leaving, that I was going to the hospital to check on you and the twins. I closed my eyes, picturing the scene in the stadium parking lot. The neon lights, the thumping bass, the sickening reality of my family's priorities. Harold blocked my car. DeAndre continued, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. Your father actually stood in front of my car. He pointed his finger at me and told me, stay out of Wilson family business, DeAndre. You do not understand how she operates. We are not letting her ruin tonight. The sheer gall of it. My father, a man whose luxury vehicle I leased, was physically preventing his son-in-law from ensuring his own daughter didn't die alone in a hospital. I am so sorry, DeAndre said, sounding genuinely distressed. Amber started screaming that I was ruining her birthday. Your mother was yelling about the cost of the tickets. It was insane, Sienna. They were acting like you had intentionally ruptured your appendix to spite them. I didn't argue with them anymore. He confessed, the shame evident in his tone. I just sat in the car for the entire concert. I couldn't even look at them. I am packing a bag right now. I am staying at my brother's place for a few days. I can't be in this house with her right now. The revelation that DeAndre was leaving Amber even temporarily was significant. He was the primary breadwinner in their household. Amber's sporadic income from her creative pursuits barely covered her expensive coffee habits. Without DeAndre, Amber's financial stability rested entirely on one pillar. Me. DeAndre. I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the physical pain I was currently enduring. Do not feel guilty. You are the only person who treated me like a human being last night. I appreciate you. Just focus on resting, he replied softly. I will check on the twins later if that is okay. Thank you, I said, and disconnected the call. I stared at the ceiling, my mind already calculating the cascading effects of DeAndre's departure. Amber was going to panic. When she panicked, she inevitably ran to our parents. When our parents needed a bailout, they inevitably ran to me. But the ATM was out of order. The vault was sealed. They had built an entire ecosystem on my financial submissiveness, and DeAndre's realization of their toxicity was the first major crack in their foundation. The rest of the structure was about to come crashing down. I just needed to start pulling the load-bearing columns. The painkillers were beginning to make my thoughts fuzzy, but I forced myself to stay awake just a little longer. I needed to initiate the first phase of the liquidation. I needed to ensure that by the time they realized the money was gone, it was already too late to do anything about it. I pushed through the heavy narcotic fog clouding my brain. The painkillers were designed to pull me under, to force my body into a state of healing rest, but my mind was operating on a completely different frequency. Adrenaline and absolute clarity had hijacked my nervous system. I pressed the red call button pinned to my bedsheet. Nurse Nora appeared in the doorway less than a minute later, her brow furrowed in immediate concern. She stepped quickly to my side, checking the monitors. Are you in pain, Sienna? She asked, reaching for my IV line. Do you need me to adjust your dosage? No, I said, my voice raspy but firm. I need my personal belongings bag. Specifically, I need my laptop. Nurse Nora blinked, clearly taken aback. Sienna, you just had major abdominal surgery. Your body experienced a severe trauma. You need to sleep, not check your work emails. I offered her a weak but genuine smile. I am not checking work emails, Nora. I am securing my children's future. Please, it is extremely important that I do this right now before the morning completely sets in. She studied my face for a long moment, searching for signs of delirium, but found only cold, unyielding determination. Without another word, she walked over to the small plastic locker in the corner of the room, retrieved my sleek silver work laptop, and carefully placed it on my adjustable tray table. She raised the table over my lap, ensuring it did not press against my bandaged abdomen. "Thank you," I told her. "Do not push yourself too hard," she warned softly, before stepping out to give me privacy. I opened the laptop. The screen flared to life, casting a harsh blue light across the sterile hospital room. The glowing screen felt like a weapon, and I was about to deploy it with absolute precision. I bypassed my corporate email and went straight to my personal encrypted drive. I opened a blank Excel spreadsheet and titled the document Liability Audit. I logged into my primary banking portal, navigating the two-factor authentication with practiced ease. The dashboard loaded, displaying my checking, savings, investment accounts, and the heavy line of credit accounts I maintained. My eyes bypassed my own conservative spending and zeroed in on the authorized user cards. First, I pulled the transaction history for the past 48 hours. There it was, sitting at the top of the ledger like a neon sign of betrayal. The stadium VIP tickets, $12,000. The luxury SUV rental for the weekend, $800. The premium catered tailgate package, $400. All billed directly to my platinum card. The very event they chose over my life, the concert that was supposedly more important than my ruptured appendix, was entirely bankrolled by my grueling 60-hour workweeks. They had essentially used my own money to fund my abandonment. I highlighted those rows in bright aggressive red. Next, I opened the automatic drafting tab. My father Harold loved to present himself as a successful retired patriarch. In reality, his bad investments had wiped out his savings nearly a decade ago. I located his luxury sedan lease. $1,200 automatically withdrawn from my account on the first of every month. He loved to parade that vehicle around his pristine neighborhood, accepting compliments for a lifestyle he hadn't earned. I stared at the line item. $1,200 a month, so a man who told his son-in-law to ignore my medical emergency could look wealthy at stoplights. I highlighted the row in red. Then came my mother, Margaret. I downloaded the past 12 months of statements for the credit card possessing her name. The sheer volume of her vanity expenses made my jaw clench. Not from sadness, but from the breathtaking audacity of her entitlement. Her elite country club membership, $2,500 a month, plus the weekly spa treatments, the extensive dining room tabs, the private tennis lessons. She spent my money with the casual disregard of a lottery winner, swiping the card for designer handbags and expensive lunches with women she secretly despised. She had called me a nuisance while sipping premium wine paid for by the very daughter she refused to help. I dragged my cursor down, highlighting 12 months of Margaret's transactions in red. Finally, I filtered the spreadsheet by Amber's specific authorized user card number. My 28-year-old sister's transaction history was a chaotic, infuriating timeline of financial parasitism. $5 artisanal coffees twice a day. $700 designer shoes bought on a random Tuesday. Expensive grocery deliveries from premium organic markets because she claimed she was too exhausted from her creative process to actually cook. She called me a drama queen and accused me of stealing her birthday spotlight, yet she relied entirely on my income to maintain the illusion of an independent artistic lifestyle. With DeAndre leaving her, she would undoubtedly try to increase this spending to self-soothe her bruised ego. I highlighted Amber's entire column in red. I saved the most significant asset for last. The sprawling suburban house. I navigated to the county property tax portal and my mortgage servicer's website. The house was legally 100% in my name. I bought it 5 years ago when Harold's financial failures nearly left them facing eviction. I placed the deed in a blind trust, where I retained total control, allowing them to live there rent-free to save them from public embarrassment. They treated the property like their ancestral estate, hosting lavish dinner parties and acting like self-made aristocrats, while I quietly covered every single expense. I logged the monthly mortgage payment, the staggering property taxes, the homeowner's insurance, and the utility bills. All of it automatically drafted from my accounts, all of it funding a stage for their performance of a perfect wealthy family. I highlighted the housing expenses in the darkest shade of red available. I hit the auto sum button at the bottom of the spreadsheet. The screen calculated for a fraction of a second before displaying the aggregate total. The sum of what I had spent on Harold, Margaret, and Amber over the past 5 years flashed on the screen. $450,000. Nearly $500,000 siphoned from my savings, bled from my children's future, stolen from my own security. And for what? For a mother who rolled her eyes at my ruptured organs. For a father who fiercely guarded a stadium parking spot while I was rushed into a trauma bay. For a sister who accused me of faking a life-threatening illness. I stared at the number. $450,000. I did not shed a single tear. The numbers were pure, unadulterated logic. They validated every cold, calculating decision I was about to make. A risk analyst does not mourn a bad investment. A risk analyst cuts their losses and liquidates the toxic assets. I opened the card management portal. I selected Margaret's authorized user card. I hovered over the button labeled Freeze Account. I clicked it. The status instantly changed from active to suspended. I selected Harold's card. Freeze account. Click. Suspended. I selected Amber's card. Freeze account. Click. Suspended. I moved to the automatic bill pay section. I canceled the recurring transfer for Harold's luxury car lease. I canceled the monthly draft for Margaret's country club membership. I canceled the automatic payments for the suburban house utilities, routing them instead to a cancellation queue. Finally, I compiled the spreadsheet, the property deed, and the payment history into a secure PDF dossier. I drafted a short, concise email to my real estate attorney, attaching the dossier with instructions to draft a formal, unchallengeable eviction notice for the suburban property. I closed the laptop just as the morning sun fully illuminated the hospital room, casting a warm, golden glow across the sterile white blankets. The financial umbilical cord was officially severed. In a few hours, Margaret would likely try to pay for an expensive post-concert brunch with her friends. Harold might try to fill his luxury sedan with premium gas. Amber would certainly try to buy her overpriced morning coffee. The terminals would beep, the screens would flash bright red, and the cashiers would politely inform them that their cards had been declined. The Bank of Siena was closed forever. The hospital room was completely silent after I closed the laptop. The sun had fully crested the Seattle skyline, casting long, sharp shadows across the sterile floor. My physical body was battered, stitched together, and heavily medicated, but my mind had never felt more agile. I lay back against the stiff pillows, listening to the steady, reassuring beep of the heart monitor. It was the sound of my own survival, a survival my family had actively bet against. I did not have to wait long for the inevitable. The digital clock on the wall shifted to 10 in the morning. Right on schedule, my cell phone vibrated on the bedside table. The screen lit up with a photo I had taken last Christmas. It was a picture of my mother, Margaret, wearing a cashmere sweater I had bought her, holding a glass of imported wine I had paid for, standing in the kitchen of the suburban home I legally owned. I stared at her smiling face on the glowing screen. A day ago, seeing her name would have triggered a Pavlovian response of anxiety and obligation. I would have answered immediately, ready to solve whatever minor inconvenience had disrupted her morning. Today, I just watched the phone vibrate. I let it ring. I let her wait. On the fifth ring, right before it diverted to voicemail, I swiped the green icon and brought the phone to my ear. I did not say hello. I simply breathed, waiting for her to speak first. Sienna Margaret barked, her voice carrying that familiar grating tone of weaponized exhaustion. You will not believe the absolute nightmare we just endured. The traffic leaving that stadium was a complete catastrophe. We sat in the luxury SUV for 2 hours, just trying to get out of the VIP parking lot. It was barbaric, and Amber drank entirely too much of that complimentary champagne. She was complaining about a headache the entire ride back to the house. I remained perfectly silent. The risk analyst in my brain started a stopwatch. I wanted to log exactly how many seconds it would take for a mother to ask her daughter if she had survived an emergency organ removal. 30 seconds passed. Margaret continued her tirade, completely oblivious to the deafening silence on my end of the line. And the noise, Margaret complained, her voice rising in pitch. I know you paid a fortune for those tickets, and we had a good time during the actual performance. but the opening act was just dreadful. My ears are still ringing. But that is not even the worst part of it. The real disaster is your father. 45 seconds. Still no mention of the hospital. Still no mention of the ruptured appendix. Still no inquiry about the 4-year-old twins she had abandoned. Harold insisted on wearing those new Italian leather loafers you bought him for his birthday. Margaret went on, her tone laced with deep manufactured suffering. I told him they were not practical for a stadium, even a VIP suite. He stood for 3 hours straight. Now his feet are completely swollen. He is hobbling around the kitchen right now, groaning like he just ran a marathon. He cannot even put on his golf shoes. We were supposed to meet the Henderson family for a brunch date at the club in an hour, and now the entire day is ruined. 60 seconds. A full minute of breathing air into my lungs, feeling the fresh surgical incisions pull tightly across my abdomen while my mother lamented a pair of tight designer shoes. I need you to do me a favor, Margaret finally said, her voice shifting smoothly from complaining to demanding. This is the transactional pivot I knew so well. Since our day is completely ruined, I called the Azure Wellness Retreat downtown. They have a last-minute opening for their premium couples recovery package. It includes deep tissue massages, hydrotherapy, and a specialized reflexology treatment for your father's feet. I stared up at the fluorescent lights. And what does that have to do with me? Well, Margaret sighed, sounding profoundly put out by having to explain something so obvious. I left my platinum card in my other designer purse, the one I took to the country club yesterday. And Harold cannot find his wallet in the mess of the SUV. The spa requires a direct wire transfer or an upfront digital payment to hold the last-minute slot. I need you to wire $2,000 to my checking account right now so I can secure the booking. We need this recovery day, Sienna. The concert really took a toll on us. 1 minute and 20 seconds. That was the final logged time. My mother had called me knowing I was in a hospital facing a life-threatening infection, and she used that call to demand $2,000 for a foot massage. The sheer, unadulterated narcissism of the request was so vast it bordered on majestic. It was a perfect, crystalline representation of our entire relationship. I was bleeding and she was asking me to buy her a bandage for a paper cut. Mom, I said, my voice dropping an octave, settling into a cold, flat register that I usually reserved for hostile corporate takeovers. What is it? She snapped, clearly annoyed that I had not immediately agreed and transferred the funds. Make it quick, Sienna. They are only holding the spa reservation for another 10 minutes. Did you enjoy the concert? I asked calmly. I literally just told you it was fine, but the parking was a nightmare. She huffed. Why are you dragging this out? Just send the money. Your father is in pain. My appendix ruptured last night, I stated, slicing through her complaints with absolute precision. I was rushed into an emergency operating room. The surgeons had to cut open my abdomen and remove a necrotic infected organ that was actively poisoning my bloodstream. I was on the brink of septic shock. I could have died on that table. There was a beat of silence on the other end of the line. For a fraction of a second, I thought maybe, just maybe, the reality of my words would pierce her thick armor of self-absorption. I thought the maternal instinct might finally kick in. Well, Margaret said, her tone defensive and dismissive. You are talking to me right now, so obviously you did not die. You are in a hospital surrounded by doctors. You are perfectly fine. We, on the other hand, are dealing with a severe mobility issue with your father. The doctors can handle your stomach ache, Sienna. I need to handle your father's feet. Are you sending the $2,000 or not? The last invisible thread tethering me to my family snapped. It did not break with a loud, dramatic crack. It dissolved quietly, turning into ash and blowing away in the sterile hospital air. I felt no anger. I felt no sorrow. I felt nothing but the liberating emptiness of a closed account. Margaret, I said, refusing to call her mom ever again. Excuse me, she gasped clearly, shocked by the use of her first name. How dare you speak to me? Transaction denied, I interrupted, my voice as hard and unforgiving as reinforced steel. Fund your own recovery. I pulled the phone away from my ear and pressed the red button to end the call. The screen went dark. I did not block her number immediately. A risk analyst needs to monitor the fallout of a canceled contract. I set the phone face up on my tray table and watched it. 10 seconds later, the screen lit up with an incoming call from Margaret. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. 30 seconds after that, the screen lit up again. Another call from Margaret. I let it ring out. Then came the text messages arriving in a rapid, furious barrage. Sienna Wilson, how dare you hang up on me? Send the money right now. Your father is in agony. Stop being a selfish brat. You are ruining our weekend. Answer your phone immediately. I read each message as it popped up on the screen, feeling a strange, intoxicating surge of power. For 33 years, those messages would have sent me into a spiral of guilt and frantic compliance. I would have apologized, wired the money, and begged for her forgiveness. But the woman who would have done that was gone, excised from my life just like the infected tissue the surgeons had discarded. I picked up the phone, opened the banking application one last time, and confirmed that the freeze on their authorized user cards was fully active. The digital padlocks were in place. The eviction notice emailed to my attorney was marked as delivered and read. The cancellation of Harold's luxury car lease was processing. The $2,000 spa day request was just the opening skirmish. I knew exactly what was going to happen next. Margaret, furious that I was ignoring her texts, would storm out of the house, drag Harold into his leased SUV, and drive to the Azure Wellness Retreat anyway. She would confidently approach the front desk, pull out the sleek metal platinum card with her name on it, and attempt to swipe it for the couple's massage package. She would expect the machine to chime with approval, just as it had done for the past 5 years. She would expect my hard work to cover her extravagance. Instead, she was going to face a very different reality. I leaned my head back against the pillows, a cold, genuine smile touching my lips for the first time since the ordeal began. Let the games begin. 4 days later, I was officially discharged from Seattle General Hospital. My physical movements were slow and calculated, hampered by the abdominal stitches, but my mental focus was razor sharp. I did not go straight home to my townhouse to rest. Instead, I directed my private car service to the downtown high-rise building of my asset protection attorney, Harrison. Harrison had been managing my financial portfolios for the past 5 years. He knew the exact layout of my assets, including the suburban property where Harold and Margaret currently resided. When I walked into his corner office, leaning slightly on a cane for support, he immediately stood up, his face etched with professional concern. I waved off his sympathies and handed him the printed dossier I had compiled from my hospital bed. "Harrison," I said, taking a seat in the leather chair opposite his mahogany desk, "we are restructuring my entire asset portfolio today, specifically the residential property located in Oakwood Estates." Harrison opened the file, scanning the highlighted red lines of financial drain I had meticulously documented. "Sienna, you hold the sole legal deed to that property," he noted carefully. "Your parents are legally classified as month-to-month tenants with a $0 rental agreement. You can evict them with a standard notice. An eviction is messy and gives them room to drag it out in court, claiming emotional distress or trying to guilt-trip me through the media," I replied smoothly. "I want something completely bulletproof. I want to transfer the deed of that house into an irrevocable blind trust immediately. The trust will be managed by your firm. I will have zero direct legal ownership of the property on paper, which means Harold and Margaret cannot sue me or manipulate me for the right to remain there." Harrison smiled, the sharp, appreciative smile of a lawyer recognizing a flawless corporate maneuver. By transferring the asset to an irrevocable trust, the trust becomes the legal entity acting as the landlord. The trust has a fiduciary duty to maximize its assets, meaning it cannot legally allow tenants to live there rent-free. The trust will issue a formal 30-day notice to vacate or demand market-rate rent, which is roughly $6,000 a month for that neighborhood. "Exactly," I said, leaning forward despite the pull on my stitches. "They cannot afford $6,000 a month. They cannot afford $600 a month without my credit cards. When they inevitably fail to pay the trust, your firm will initiate the eviction." I remove myself entirely from the emotional crossfire. It becomes a sterile corporate procedure. They will not be fighting their daughter. They will be fighting a faceless financial entity. Harrison drafted the transfer paperwork right then and there. I signed my name with a heavy, satisfying stroke of the pen. The suburban fortress my parents used to project their fake wealth was no longer mine to give, and no longer theirs to exploit. The legal wall was officially erected. After finalizing the trust documents and authorizing the 30-day notice to vacate, I finally headed home. My townhouse was quiet, peaceful, and blissfully free of toxic energy. Beatrice, the premium emergency nanny, had kept Mason and Mia perfectly entertained and safe. I thanked her, transferred a generous bonus to her agency profile, and hugged my children tighter than I ever had before. But my strategic defensive line was not yet complete. Amber possessed the passcode to my front door and the access code to the community gate. My parents had physical spare keys. When the financial cutoff hit them, their first instinct would be to storm my property, demand access, and try to emotionally manipulate me in front of my children. They had always treated my home as an extension of their own territory, walking in unannounced to demand favors or raid my pantry. I picked up my phone and called a premium locksmith service. Within the hour, a technician arrived and replaced every physical lock on the exterior doors with high-security commercial-grade deadbolts. Next, I completely wiped the smart home system. I opened the administrative application on my phone and watched with immense satisfaction as I deleted Amber's fingerprint from the digital scanner. I erased Harold and Margaret's access codes from the security panel. I reset the entire network, linking it exclusively to my biometric data. The digital beep confirming the deletion of their profiles sounded like the ringing of a victory bell. A locked door is only a deterrent, not a guarantee. To ensure absolute protection, I contacted a private security firm that specialized in executive protection. I hired a 24/7 security detail. A marked vehicle with a trained guard would be stationed directly outside my townhouse gates for the next month. I provided the security firm with high-resolution photographs of Harold, Margaret, and Amber. My instructions were explicit and uncompromising. They were classified as hostile trespassers. Under no circumstances were they to be permitted entry. If they showed up and caused a scene, the guards were to contact local law enforcement immediately and press trespassing charges. There would be no warnings, no second chances, and absolutely no family exceptions. I stood by my living room window watching the security vehicle pull up and park discreetly across the street. The guard stepped out, did a perimeter check of my property, and returned to his post. A profound sense of safety settled over my home. I looked over at Mason and Mia, who were happily building a tower out of wooden blocks on the living room rug. They were smiling, completely oblivious to the chaos brewing outside our walls. I had constructed a legal and physical fortress around myself and my children. My family had spent my entire life breaking down my boundaries for their own convenience, assuming I would always be too weak or too guilty to stop them. Now those boundaries were made of iron, backed by the law and enforced by armed professionals. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of cold water, and waited. The trap was set, the walls were fortified, and the financial shockwaves were already rippling toward them. The financial shockwaves reached my sister first. I sat at my kitchen island, nursing my glass of cold water, and opened the banking application on my phone to monitor the real-time fallout. The declined transaction alerts began rolling in just before noon. The first notification was a failed $70 charge for a premium mimosa delivery service. 10 minutes later, a second alert flashed across my screen. A declined $85 charge for an executive rideshare service. Amber was awake, hungover from the concert, and entirely stripped of her purchasing power. I set the phone down and opened my laptop to review a different set of metrics. I had spent the last 2 years subsidizing Amber's vanity job at a boutique public relations agency downtown. The agency owner, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Genevieve, only kept Amber on the payroll because I funneled lucrative corporate consulting contracts to her firm. Amber treated the job as a personal photo shoot location, showing up late, taking 3-hour lunches, and contributing absolutely nothing to the actual workload. My phone buzzed against the marble countertop. It was a text message from Genevieve, Sienna. I am incredibly sorry to bother you while you are recovering, Genevieve wrote, but I had to let Amber go today. She showed up at 1 in the afternoon completely hungover and insulted a major client in the lobby. When I pulled her into my office to reprimand her, she screamed that she didn't need this job because you fund her entire life anyway. I simply cannot tolerate her toxicity in my agency anymore. I typed my response with deliberate, steady fingers. Genevieve, you made the absolutely correct decision. Do not apologize. I am officially terminating my financial support for Amber. You will retain my corporate contracts, but you no longer have to tolerate my sister. Consider the dead weight permanently dropped. Genevieve replied instantly, with a simple grateful heart emoji. Amber was now unemployed, unpartnered since DeAndre walked out and completely broke. I knew exactly where she would head next. Like a parasite seeking a new host when the current one runs dry, she would come straight to my house. She knew I kept a spare, fully paid-off Audi sedan in my third garage bay. She would expect to crash in my guest room, raid my pantry, and demand the keys to the Audi so she could drive around the city playing the victim. At precisely 2:15 in the afternoon, the high-definition security application on my tablet chimed with a perimeter alert motion detected at the main gate. I tapped the screen, bringing up the live 4K camera feed from my front entrance. There she was. Amber stood on the sidewalk looking absolutely unhinged. She was still wearing the same glittering custom-made outfit from her Instagram post the night before, but the glamour had completely dissolved. Her mascara was heavily smeared beneath her eyes. She was dragging a heavy designer overnight bag across the concrete, her expensive heels clicking aggressively as she marched up to my pedestrian gate. I watched as she confidently reached out and punched her personalized access code into the digital keypad. A sharp red light flashed on the panel. Access denied. Amber frowned, her perfectly manicured fingers jabbing the buttons a second time, pressing them much harder. Red light. Access denied. Open the stupid gate! Amber shrieked, kicking the wrought iron bars with her designer heel. Sienna, open this gate right now. I know you are in there resting. DeAndre left me and my stupid bank card is glitching. I need to come inside. She reached for the keypad a third time, but before her finger could touch the glass, a towering figure stepped into the frame. It was Officer Briggs, the lead agent from the private executive security firm I had hired. He stepped out of his marked patrol vehicle, his posture radiating absolute uncompromising authority. His hand rested casually near his tactical utility belt. "Step away from the gate, ma'am," Officer Briggs commanded. His voice was deep professional and entirely devoid of sympathy. Amber whipped around, her eyes wide with indignation. "Excuse me. Do you have any idea who I am? I am Sienna Wilson's sister. This is my sister's house. I have a guest room here. Get out of my way and let me punch in my code. The machine is just broken." "The machine is functioning perfectly," Officer Briggs replied, not moving a single inch. "Your biometric data and access codes have been permanently purged from the security network. You are currently classified as a hostile trespasser. I am instructing you to step away from the property line immediately." Amber's jaw dropped. The sheer shock of being denied access to her primary funding source temporarily paralyzed her. "Hostile trespasser," she gasped, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. "Are you insane? I am family. My husband just walked out on me. I just got fired by my psychotic boss. I need to sleep in the guest house and I need the keys to the Audi in the garage. Sienna never even drives it. Tell her to come out here and give me the keys right now." "Ma'am," Officer Briggs stated, his tone dropping to a colder, firmer register. "The resident of this property has explicitly denied you entry. If you do not remove yourself and your luggage from this sidewalk in the next 10 seconds, I will contact local law enforcement and you will be arrested for trespassing and disturbing the peace." Several of my affluent neighbors were currently walking their purebred dogs down the tree-lined sidewalk. They stopped, their eyes locked on the spectacle of a disheveled, glittering woman screaming at an armed security guard in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon. The social humiliation was absolute and public. Amber noticed the audience. Her face flushed a deep mottled crimson. She pulled her phone from her pocket, her hands shaking with rage. Fine, she screamed, pointing her phone at the camera lens she knew I was watching through. You want to be a cold-blooded monster, Sienna? Fine, I am calling Mom and Dad. They will come over here and force you to open this gate. You cannot treat your own flesh and blood like a criminal. I watched her frantically dial our parents' number, pressing the phone to her ear. She waited. Her expression shifted from furious confidence to dawning panic. She pulled the phone away, stared at the screen, and dialed again. They are not answering, she muttered, her voice cracking. Why are they not answering? I smiled, taking a slow sip of my cold water. Harold and Margaret were not answering because they were currently dealing with their own catastrophic financial apocalypse. Their cards were declining at the luxury spa, their gas tanks were empty, and the illusion of their wealth was evaporating in real time. They had no resources left to rescue their golden child. I pressed the intercom button on my tablet app, routing my voice directly to the high-definition speaker mounted above the gate. My voice echoed across the sidewalk, crisp, clear, and utterly merciless. The Audi was sold to a private dealership this morning, Amber, I announced through the speaker. The guest room is being converted into a home gym. DeAndre left you because you are toxic, and Genevieve fired you because you are useless. Your funding has been permanently terminated. You have exactly 5 seconds to remove yourself from my property line before Officer Briggs calls the police. 5, 4, 3. Amber stared at the speaker, her eyes wide with genuine terror. She finally realized this was not a negotiation. There were no tears to manipulate, no guilt to exploit. She grabbed the handle of her designer overnight bag, her chest heaving with panicked sobs, and practically sprinted away from the gate, her heels slipping on the pavement as she fled down the street. I released the intercom button and closed the application. The neighborhood returned to its quiet, manicured peace. The first parasite had been successfully eradicated. The golden child was officially locked out in the cold. Now it was time to watch the empire fall. I did not have to wait long. The digital dashboard of my banking application became a live broadcast of my parents' rapid descent into financial ruin. As I sat at my kitchen island sipping the last of my cold water, the red notification badges began to pop up on my screen with the rhythmic consistency of a metronome. The illusion they had spent decades building was unraveling in real time, and I had a front row seat to the destruction. First came the attempt at the Azure Wellness Retreat. Margaret had clearly ignored my verbal denial during our phone call. The screen flashed a sharp red alert. Declined transaction. $2,000. I could easily picture the scene. Margaret standing at the marble reception desk demanding the concierge run the heavy metal black Amex, again aggressively blaming a faulty chip reader. Harold shifting his weight painfully on his swollen feet, trying to maintain his aura of quiet wealth, while the spa staff politely but firmly turned them away into the street. But my parents were nothing if not stubbornly committed to their delusions. Denied their luxury spa day, Harold apparently decided to seek comfort in his usual sanctuary to soothe his bruised ego, the Oakwood Country Club. At exactly 1:45 in the afternoon, a new flurry of alerts hit my screen. Harold was attempting to open a massive tab at the men's grill. $50 for a round of premium scotch. Declined. An hour later, a much larger charge attempted to process. $450 for a catered lunch with his golf buddies. Declined. Then my phone rang. The caller identification displayed the main office number of the Oakwood Country Club. I answered it on the second ring, keeping my voice perfectly level and devoid of any emotion. Sienna Wilson speaking, I said. Ms. Wilson, this is Gregory, the general manager at Oakwood. The voice on the other end sounded incredibly uncomfortable, practically sweating through the receiver. I am terribly sorry to bother you, but we are experiencing a severe issue with your father's member account. The automatic draft for his monthly dues, which is routed through your primary checking account, bounced this morning. Additionally, his card is currently declining at the grill. He is entertaining several prominent guests, and he is becoming quite hostile with our waitstaff about the terminal being broken. Harold was throwing a tantrum to save face in front of the very men he was trying to impress. He was playing the outraged billionaire, entirely forgetting that his billionaire status was exclusively funded by his daughter's 60-hour workweeks. Harold, who always ordered the dry-aged bone in ribeye and a bottle of top-shelf Macallan to project power, was suddenly exposed as a man who could not even afford the complimentary breadbasket. Gregory, I replied smoothly, leaning against my kitchen counter. The terminal is not broken. I have permanently revoked all funding for Harold and Margaret's club membership. The payment method has been legally terminated. Please inform my father that he will need to settle his grill tab with his own personal funds today. If he cannot produce alternative payment, I authorize you to handle it exactly as you would any other patron attempting to dine and dash. There was a stunned, heavy silence on the line. I understand, Ms. Wilson. I will handle it personally with the board of directors. I disconnected the call, imagining the exact shade of purple Harold's face would turn when Gregory discreetly pulled him aside, handed him the declined receipt, and asked him for a valid form of payment in front of his wealthy audience. The man who had commanded DeAndre to stay out of Wilson family business was currently discovering that the Wilson family business was entirely bankrupt. But Harold's humiliation was a quiet country club affair handled behind closed doors. Margaret's downfall was about to be a public theatrical spectacle of the highest order. Deprived of her spa day and furious at the world, my mother predictably sought solace in her favorite coping mechanism: aggressive retail therapy. If there was one thing Margaret loved more than pretending to be rich, it was proving she was rich to the other suburban socialites who constantly judged her. At 3:30 in the afternoon, the most significant alert of the day flashed across my screen. Declined transaction, $4,500. The vendor was listed as Maison de Luxe, the most exclusive designer boutique in the downtown shopping district. Before the screen even dimmed, my cell phone began to vibrate violently across the Marble Island. It was a FaceTime video request from Margaret. She was calling me directly from the boutique. I adjusted my posture, made sure my facial expression was utterly blank, and accepted the video call. Margaret's face immediately filled the screen. She looked frantic. Her perfect salon blowout was slightly frizzy, and her eyes were wide with a toxic mixture of panic and fury. Behind her, I could see the pristine white shelves of the boutique and the highly concerned face of a sharply dressed sales associate holding a wireless card reader. Sienna, Margaret hissed, keeping her voice low but frantic. What on earth is going on with the bank? I am standing at the checkout counter at Maison de Luxe with Penelope and Constance. I am trying to purchase the limited edition calfskin tote we discussed at brunch, and this ridiculous machine keeps rejecting the black Amex. Call your bank immediately and authorize the release of the fraud hold. They are embarrassing me. I looked past her shoulder on the high-definition video feed. I could clearly see Penelope and Constance, two of the most notoriously gossipy women in Margaret's elite social circle, standing a few feet away. They were pretending to examine a display of silk scarves, but their eyes were darting toward Margaret, soaking in every single second of the unfolding disaster. There is no fraud hold. Margaret, I said, my voice crisp, projecting perfectly through her phone speaker, so anyone standing nearby could hear the absolute finality in my tone. She flinched violently at the sound of her first name. What are you talking about? Fix the card, Sienna. Penelope is paying for her purchases right now and waiting for me to finish. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? I know exactly how humiliating it is, I replied, leaning closer to the camera lens. It is almost as humiliating as lying on a hospital gurney preparing for emergency surgery to remove an infected organ and having your mother tell you that your life is a nuisance because it interrupts her Taylor Swift tailgate. Margaret's face drained of all color, leaving her skin a sickly ashen gray. She glanced nervously at the sales associate, who was now openly staring at the phone screen. Sienna, keep your voice down. We will discuss your little hospital stay later. Right now, I need you to unlock this card. I have a reputation to maintain in this town. You have no reputation, I stated, dropping the heavy iron hammer of truth. You have my reputation. You have my credit score. You have my money. And as of this morning, I have officially repossessed all of it. The card is not glitching. The account is permanently closed. I have revoked your authorized user status. You have zero purchasing power attached to my name. You cannot do this to me! Margaret gasped, her voice finally rising above a whisper, echoing loudly in the quiet high-end boutique. I am your mother. You owe me respect. You are a parasite, I corrected her, my tone dropping to absolute zero. and the host has finally taken her medication. Through the video feed, I saw Penelope step closer, a sickly, sweet smile plastered across her face. "Margaret, dear," Penelope purred, her voice dripping with Southern Belle venom. "If you are having money troubles, we can always go somewhere more affordable. The outlet mall has lovely synthetic bags this season. You do not have to pretend for us." The sheer humiliation wrapped in fake sympathy made Margaret physically recoil. Her affluent friends had completely stopped pretending to look at the scarves. They were staring openly at Margaret now, their expressions a mix of shock and hungry delight. The undisputed queen of their social circle was being publicly dethroned, exposed as a complete fraud who lived entirely off her daughter's charity. "Ma'am," the sales associate interrupted politely, holding up the declined black Amex. "If you do not have an alternative form of payment for the handbag, I am going to have to ask you to step aside so I can assist the actual paying customers." Margaret looked at the sales associate, then at Penelope and Constance, and finally back at the phone screen. The absolute soul-crushing reality of her situation hit her all at once. She had no alternative form of payment. Her personal checking account had been empty for years. The physical cash in her designer wallet would not even cover the sales tax on the luxury bag she was trying to buy. "Sienna, please," Margaret begged, the furious entitlement finally dissolving into raw, pathetic desperation. "Do not do this to me in front of my friends. Just transfer the funds for this one purchase. I will pay you back, I promise. Just save me from this humiliation." I looked at the woman who had birthed me, the woman who had called me a burden while my body was shutting down. I felt absolutely no pity. I felt no familial obligation. I only felt the clean, sterile satisfaction of a perfectly executed risk mitigation strategy. "You are holding a piece of useless plastic, Margaret," I said softly, ensuring every word landed with devastating permanent impact. "Please hand it to the cashier and ask him to cut it in half. You are officially bankrupt." I ended the FaceTime call. I set the phone down on the kitchen island and exhaled a long, steady breath. The financial blood supply was completely severed. Harold was trapped at the country club with an unpaid tab and a revoked membership. Amber was locked out of my gated community with her luggage dragging on the pavement. Margaret was standing penniless in a luxury boutique, her fake wealth exposed to the very women she spent her life trying to impress. The Wilson family had spent 33 years taking my money, my energy, and my sanity. It took exactly 6 hours for me to take it all back. I stood up from the kitchen stool, feeling a renewed surge of energy despite my healing surgical wounds. The preliminary strikes were flawless, but the final desperate confrontation was inevitable. A family of narcissists does not lose their primary funding source without a violent fight. They would quickly group together. They would realize they were facing total ruin, and they would come for me. I walked over to the security panel on the wall, checking the perimeter cameras one more time. Officer Briggs was still standing watch at the front gate, a silent, heavily armed sentinel protecting my hard-earned peace. I was ready for them. Let them come. But as I stared at the high-definition monitor, my risk assessment matrix flagged one final glaring vulnerability. It was a massive unsecured asset that Harold and Margaret would undoubtedly target the moment their financial desperation peaked. Grandpa Silas. My 80-year-old grandfather resided in a premium assisted living facility on the other side of the city. Silas Wilson was not just a retired corporate attorney. He was the sole legal owner of the ancestral Wilson estate, 300 acres of prime undeveloped commercial real estate sitting right on the edge of the expanding metropolitan border. For the past decade, Harold had practically salivated over that land. He constantly presented Silas with predatory development contracts, begging him to sell the acreage so Harold could fund his luxury lifestyle and pay off his mounting secret debts. Silas had always refused. To avoid the relentless badgering, my grandfather played the role of a frail, confused old man, nodding along and pretending he did not understand the paperwork. But Silas was not confused. His mind was a steel trap. He had successfully litigated corporate mergers before I was even born. And right now, Harold, broke, publicly humiliated, and locked out of my bank accounts, would view that ancestral land as his absolute last lifeline. I could not leave Silas exposed to their manipulation. I grabbed my keys, moving carefully to protect my healing surgical incisions. I stepped out the front door and signaled to Officer Briggs. I am leaving for approximately 2 hours, I told the security guard. The perimeter lockdown remains in full effect. Do not let anyone near the gate. I drove my secondary vehicle, a reliable SUV, navigating the Seattle traffic with focused precision. When I pulled into the sweeping driveway of the Oak Creek retirement community, I bypassed the front desk and walked straight to the residential wing. I swiped my access card and pushed open the door to Silas's suite, expecting to find him reading in his recliner or watching the financial news networks. Instead, I found an 80-year-old man standing perfectly upright, snapping the brass latches on a vintage leather suitcase. He was fully dressed in a crisp tweed suit, his silver hair neatly combed, projecting an aura of absolute authority. "You took longer than I anticipated," Sienna Silas said. His voice was deep and gravelly, completely devoid of the weak, trembling tone he usually adopted for my parents. I leaned against the doorframe, momentarily stunned. "You knew I was coming." Silas chuckled, a dry, knowing sound that echoed in the quiet room. "I am retired, not dead. I have been watching the financial markets and monitoring my own bank accounts. Harold called me precisely 47 minutes ago, panicking, practically hyperventilating into the receiver. He begged me for a $50,000 bridge loan. He claimed there was a banking error and that he was stranded at his country club, unable to pay his tab. When I asked him why he didn't just call his wealthy daughter to fix it, the line went dead. I deduced you finally cut the cord." I nodded, stepping fully into the room. My appendix ruptured on the night of the concert. They refused to come to the hospital. Margaret called me a nuisance and told me to hire a babysitter so she wouldn't miss the opening act. "I almost died, Grandpa." The amusement vanished from Silas's face instantly. His jaw tightened, and the sharp, ruthless litigator he used to be flashed dangerously in his dark eyes. "They left you to die for a pop concert." "Yes," I answered evenly, meeting his furious gaze. "So I liquidated them. The suburban house is now in a blind trust. The credit cards are permanently canceled. Amber is locked out by armed security. They are entirely bankrupt. And when Harold realizes he has zero options left, he will come here to force you to sign over the land." Silas grabbed the handle of his suitcase, his knuckles white. "He will not find me here. Let us go. I have already filed the discharge paperwork with the administration desk through my digital portal." As we walked down this polished corridor, a frantic nursing director tried to intercept us, waving a clipboard and citing medical protocols and liability releases. Silas did not even slow his pace. He simply handed her a laminated legal document he had pulled from his breast pocket. He cited 3 specific state statutes regarding the voluntary discharge of an independent adult and threatened her facility with a massive wrongful detainment lawsuit if she delayed our exit by another 30 seconds. The director paled and stepped aside immediately. The drive back to my secure townhouse was quiet, but charged with electric anticipation. Silas looked out the passenger window, watching the city skyline pass by. He had watched Harold and Margaret exploit my generosity for years. He had remained silent, knowing that any intervention on his part would only cause my parents to attack me harder, waiting patiently for the day I finally woke up and recognized my own power. "DeAndre texted me this morning," Silas noted casually, not taking his eyes off the passing traffic. "He informed me that he is filing for divorce from your sister. He apologized for not stopping their behavior sooner. I told him a smart man knows when to abandon a sinking ship. Amber is exactly like her mother, a bottomless pit of entitlement with zero work ethic." I smiled, keeping my eyes on the road. "DeAndre is safe. The rest of them are going to face the absolute consequences of their actions." When we arrived at my property, Officer Briggs opened the heavy iron gate, recognizing my vehicle. I drove into the garage and helped Silas inside. Mason and Mia ran into the hallway, their faces lighting up with pure joy at the sight of their great-grandfather. Silas dropped to one knee, ignoring his stiff joints, and wrapped his arms around the twins. His stern face melted into genuine, profound love. This was what real family looked like. I guided Silas to the first-floor guest suite, the large bedroom I had previously reserved for Amber's toxic, hungover sleepovers. It was spacious, comfortable, and now occupied by the only elder in my family worthy of my respect and resources. Silas unpacked his suit jackets and placed a thick, heavy leather briefcase on the mahogany desk in the corner of the room. He patted the top of the briefcase with a weathered hand, looking back at me with a calculating gleam in his eye. "I have been drafting some new legal documents," Sienna Silas said, his tone shifting back to the sharp corporate attorney. "Documents concerning the ancestral estate. Harold thinks he is entitled to those 300 acres by birthright. He thinks he can outlast my lifespan. But I have been waiting for the right moment to execute a very specific, irrevocable transfer of assets. A moment when you are finally free of their parasitic influence." I looked at the battered leather briefcase, suddenly realizing the massive magnitude of what he was implying. "You are bringing a nuclear weapon to a knife fight, Grandpa." Silas smiled, a cold, predatory expression that matched my own. "When you are eliminating parasites, Sienna, you do not use a knife. You scorch the entire earth. Now we wait. Hunger makes absolute fools out of greedy people. They will come to your gate, and when they do, we will be ready to give them their final verdict." 3 weeks passed in absolute glorious silence. The kind of silence that only comes when you successfully sever a parasitic connection and reclaim your own life. My surgical wounds healed rapidly, mirroring the swift recovery of my financial and emotional state. Inside my secure townhouse, Mason and Mia thrived, their laughter echoing off the walls, completely shielded from the toxic storm brewing outside. Grandpa Silas settled into the guest suite, seamlessly spending his days reading thick legal volumes and plotting the ultimate demise of Harold's greedy ambitions. The liquidation of the Wilson family proceeded exactly as my attorney Harrison had projected. The irrevocable blind trust issued the formal 30-day notice to vacate the suburban property. Because I had canceled the automatic utility payments and because my parents lacked the credit score or the liquid cash to establish new accounts in their own names, the power and water at their sprawling house were abruptly shut off. They were living in a dark, freezing mansion they did not own. Harold's luxury SUV was unceremoniously repossessed directly from the Oakwood Country Club parking lot. The general manager, Gregory, had happily relayed that deeply humiliating detail to Harrison. Margaret was blacklisted from every high-end boutique and spa in the metropolitan area. Amber, completely broke and entirely abandoned by her former enablers, had been frantically couch-surfing. The inevitable breaking point arrived on a gloomy, overcast Thursday afternoon. I was sitting at the kitchen island with Silas reviewing a commercial real estate prospectus when the high-definition perimeter alarm chimed sharply through the house. Motion detected at the main gate. I tapped the tablet screen, bringing up the live 4K exterior camera feed. Silas leaned over my shoulder, his dark eyes narrowing as he analyzed the monitor. A heavily dented budget-tier rideshare vehicle aggressively pulled up to the curb outside my imposing iron gates. The stark contrast to their usual luxury transport was immediately apparent. Harold stepped out of the back seat first. The physical toll of 3 weeks of absolute financial starvation was undeniably catastrophic. His posture, usually puffed up with artificial superiority, was hunched and defeated. He wore a wrinkled suit jacket that looked like it had been slept in for days. His face was unshaven and his eyes were wild with a feral, frantic desperation. Margaret emerged next, and the sight of her almost made me laugh out loud. The undisputed queen of the suburban socialites was completely unrecognizable. Her signature salon blowout was gone, replaced by a flat, greasy ponytail. The expensive designer clothes she usually flaunted were swapped for baggy, mismatched sweatpants. She clutched a cheap canvas grocery tote instead of her French leather handbag, looking incredibly fragile and terrified. Amber scrambled out of the other side of the vehicle, looking pale and completely unhinged. She was shivering in a thin jacket, her posture radiating pure panic. Then a second vehicle pulled up right behind the rideshare. It was a sensible mid-range sedan. DeAndre stepped out, placing the car in park. He kept a significant, deliberate physical distance from the Wilson family. His arms were crossed tightly over his chest, and his face was an unreadable mask of absolute exhaustion. He had clearly been ambushed or manipulated into coming to my house, likely by Amber refusing to sign their separation paperwork unless he provided transportation for this final desperate family intervention. DeAndre looked entirely disgusted by their presence standing near his bumper, like a reluctant witness to a car crash. Officer Briggs immediately stepped out of his guard booth, resting his hand casually on his tactical utility belt. He positioned his large frame directly in the center of the driveway, completely blocking the pedestrian entrance. Harold did not retreat. Instead, he marched right up to the heavy iron bars of the gate, grabbing the cold metal with both of his shaking hands. He did not look like a wealthy patriarch commanding respect. He looked like a cornered, starving animal preparing to strike. "Open this gate right now!" Harold bellowed, his voice cracking with rage and humiliation as he glared through the bars at Officer Briggs. "I am her father. You cannot keep me away from my own daughter. Tell Sienna to get out here immediately." Officer Briggs did not flinch. He stood his ground with absolute professional apathy. "You are currently classified as a hostile trespasser, sir," Officer Briggs stated in a booming, authoritative voice. "Step away from the iron gate before I contact local law enforcement and have you removed in handcuffs." Margaret pushed past Harold, pressing her face against the bars. "Sienna!" Margaret shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly down the quiet, affluent street. "Sienna, I know you are in there watching us. They shut our power off. They took your father's car. We are freezing and we have no food. You cannot do this to us. We are your family." Amber began to violently kick the bottom of the iron gate, her composure completely shattering. "You are a cold-blooded monster, Sienna." Amber screamed, tears of pure selfish frustration streaming down her face. "You are trying to kill us. Open the door." I sat in the kitchen perfectly calm, holding a warm mug of green tea. I looked at Silas. The 80-year-old retired attorney offered me a slow, predatory smile. "It is time," Silas said, his voice rumbling with deep satisfaction. "Let us go give them their final verdict." I stood up, smoothed the fabric of my tailored trousers, and walked confidently toward the front door. The financial audit was over. The execution of consequences was about to begin. I stepped out onto the front porch, the cool afternoon breeze lifting the edge of my silk blouse. The physical distance between my front door and the security gate was exactly 30 feet. I walked those 30 feet, with the measured, deliberate pace of an executive entering a boardroom to announce a hostile corporate takeover. I did not rush. I did not cower. I approached the heavy iron bars and stopped exactly 3 feet short of them, crossing my arms over my chest. Harold, Margaret, and Amber immediately ceased their frantic banging. They stared at me, their eyes wide with a mixture of ravenous hope and simmering rage. They expected me to unlock the gate. They expected me to apologize, to invite them inside my warm house, to offer them food, and to immediately reinstate their bank cards. Instead, I just looked at them. I let the silence stretch, forcing them to feel the absolute power imbalance. They were standing on the public sidewalk, shivering and locked out. I was standing in my secure fortress, perfectly warm and entirely untouchable. Amber broke first. Her fragile, narcissistic ego could not handle the quiet rejection. She grabbed the iron bars, her knuckles turning white against the dark metal, and began to shake the gate with surprising violence. "You are a cold-blooded monster, Sienna!" Amber shrieked, her voice cracking and echoing down the pristine suburban street. "You are absolutely psychotic. Do you have any idea what you have done to us? The electricity was shut off yesterday morning. All of the food in the refrigerator is completely spoiled. I had to sleep on the hardwood floor of a freezing house last night because all my friends blocked my number when they realized my cards were declining. You did this. You are starving your own family because of a stupid misunderstanding at a concert. You are trying to kill us." I tilted my head, examining my 28-year-old sister like she was a poorly constructed spreadsheet filled with glaring calculation errors. "I am not a monster, Amber," I replied, my voice projecting clearly through the bars, loud enough for DeAndre to hear from where he stood by his sedan. "I am a consequence. You spent the last 5 years treating my bank account like your personal slush fund while contributing absolutely nothing to society. You got fired from your vanity job because you are chronically lazy and insulted a paying client. You drove your husband away because you are a toxic, entitled liability. You are not freezing because of me. You are freezing because you are a fully grown adult who refuses to work for a living. Amber gasped, taking a physical step back as if I had slapped her across the face. She looked wildly toward DeAndre, seeking backup, begging him with her eyes to defend her. But her African-American husband simply looked away, his jaw clenched in quiet, steadfast agreement with my assessment. He crossed his arms tighter, offering Amber absolutely no quarter. Harold realized Amber's hysterical tactics were failing to breach my defenses. He pushed his youngest daughter aside, pressing his unshaven face close to the iron bars. He tried to summon the booming authoritarian voice he had used to intimidate me my entire childhood, the voice of the mighty patriarch. But deprived of my money, his voice came out sounding raspy, hollow, and weak. "Listen to me right now, young lady," Harold commanded, pointing a trembling finger through the metal gate. "You will unlock this door, and you will restore our access to those accounts today. We raised you for 18 years. We put a roof over your head. We clothed you. We fed you. You owe us. You have a legal and moral obligation to take care of your parents when they are experiencing hardship." I let out a short, humorless laugh. The sheer audacity of his argument was almost mathematically fascinating. "I owe you nothing, Harold," I stated, intentionally dropping the title of Dad to sever the emotional tie. "Let us perform a quick audit of that 18-year investment, shall we? You provided the basic legally mandated minimum requirements to keep Child Protective Services from arresting you for neglect. The very second I turned 18, you demanded monthly rent for my childhood bedroom. When I went to college, you explicitly refused to co-sign my student loans. I paid for my own education. I built my own career from the ground up. I took a single step closer to the gate, locking my eyes directly with his. And over the past 5 years, I have paid you back with massive compounding interest. I bought the sprawling house you currently live in. I paid the exorbitant property taxes. I leased that luxury vehicle that was just repossessed from the country club parking lot because you could not afford a single payment on your own. I spent $450,000 funding your fake aristocratic lifestyle. My debt for my basic childhood was paid in full years ago. You do not have a daughter anymore. You have a creditor who has officially foreclosed on your accounts." Harold's mouth opened and closed silently. The authoritarian patriarch routine completely shattered against the impenetrable brick wall of my logic. His shoulders slumped, and the frantic feral energy drained out of him, leaving only a hollow, pathetic desperation. He looked down at the pavement, realizing he had absolutely no leverage left to exploit. With Harold defeated, Margaret threw herself at the gate. She abandoned the angry demands and immediately pivoted to her favorite, most utilized weapon: the victim card. She gripped the iron bars, her eyes welling with highly weaponized, manipulative tears. "Sienna, my beautiful girl, please." Margaret whimpered, her voice trembling with practiced fragility. "Please do not do this to your mother. The neighbors have been watching us load our bags into budget cars. Gregory at the country club humiliated your father in front of his most important friends. Penelope and Constance laughed at me right in the middle of a boutique. I have never been so degraded in my entire life. We have no money for groceries. My luxury skin creams are running out. You are breaking my heart." I looked at the woman who had birthed me. I searched my soul for a single ounce of empathy, a single drop of daughterly affection. The well was completely dry. Her primary concern was not her relationship with me. Her primary concern was what Penelope and Constance thought of her credit limit. "You are breaking my heart," I repeated, echoing her words with chilling clinical precision. "That is a fascinating statement, Margaret, because exactly 3 weeks ago, my appendix ruptured. I was lying on a gurney facing an emergency surgery to remove a necrotic organ. I called you begging you to watch your own 4-year-old grandchildren so they wouldn't be handed over to strangers in a hospital lobby." I paused, letting the memory hang in the cold afternoon air, making sure every single person on the sidewalk heard me clearly. "Do you remember what you told me, Margaret? Do you remember what you said while you were holding a glass of champagne in a VIP stadium parking lot that I paid for?" Margaret's eyes darted nervously. "Sienna, I was stressed. The traffic was bad. I did not understand how serious the doctors were. You called me a nuisance, I interrupted, my voice cutting through her pathetic excuses like a surgical scalpel. You told me I was a burden. You told me to figure it out myself because Taylor Swift was going on stage in 2 hours. You chose a pop concert over my life. You chose a tailgate party over the safety of Mason and Mia. Margaret squeezed her eyes shut, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks, though this time they looked genuinely born of panic rather than performance. I was wrong. I am so sorry. Please, Sienna. I am begging you. Let us come inside. Let us be a family again. We were never a family, I said softly, the absolute finality of my words settling over them like a heavy winter shroud. We were a financial transaction, and the transaction is permanently declined. I took a step back from the gate. I looked at Officer Briggs, who gave me a brief, respectful nod. He was ready to clear the sidewalk the moment I gave the command. But I was not quite finished. The confrontation had successfully neutralized their emotional attacks, stripping away their anger and their guilt trips. They were entirely broken, entirely bankrupt, and entirely out of options. But the final devastating blow of my risk mitigation strategy still needed to be delivered. I reached into the deep pocket of my tailored trousers and pulled out a thick, heavy stack of legal documents. The crisp white paper contrasted sharply with the dark iron of the gate. I held the 50-page financial dossier in my right hand, feeling the satisfying weight of absolute, undeniable proof. Harold, Margaret, and Amber stared at the thick stack of documents, their previous rage giving way to a creeping, icy dread. They did not know what I was holding, but the clinical confidence in my posture terrified them. You claim you were just stressed by stadium traffic, Margaret, I said, my voice echoing through the high-definition outdoor intercom speakers mounted on the stone pillars of my gate. You claim my memory of that night is distorted by trauma and pain medication. You want to rewrite history right here on the sidewalk so you can maintain your illusion of maternal sacrifice. But in my profession, verbal agreements and phone authorizations are legally binding. My corporate smartphone is equipped with strict compliance software that automatically logs and records every single incoming call for risk mitigation purposes. Margaret's eyes widened to the size of saucers. She took a sudden, staggering step backward, her hands flying to her mouth. I never thought I would need to use corporate surveillance software to defend myself against my own mother. I continued tapping the screen of my tablet to sync the Bluetooth connection with the perimeter security system. But I am incredibly grateful I did, because gaslighting only works when there is no permanent record of the truth. I turned the volume on the outdoor speakers to maximum and pressed play. The quiet, manicured suburban street was suddenly flooded with the deafening, chaotic background noise of the stadium parking lot. The heavy bass of pop music thumped loudly through the expensive speakers. Then Margaret's voice sliced through the crisp autumn air, perfectly clear and dripping with venomous annoyance. Are you kidding me right now, Sienna? The recorded voice of my mother blared across the pavement. We are currently tailgating in the VIP parking lot at the stadium. Taylor Swift goes on stage in exactly 2 hours. We have been planning this night for months. You could not have timed this worse. You are being a complete nuisance and a burden right now. Then came the sound of the phone being snatched. Amber's shrill, entitled voice echoed down the affluent block for everyone to hear. Seriously, Sienna, it is my birthday weekend. You always have to make absolutely everything about you. Stop being a drama queen and just hire a babysitter. I tapped the screen and stopped the playback. The heavy, suffocating silence that followed was 1,000 times louder than the recording itself. The neighbors walking their purebred dogs had completely stopped moving. A woman in a cashmere coat across the street was standing frozen on the sidewalk, staring at Margaret with undisguised, visceral horror. The social execution was absolute and instantaneous. Margaret's carefully crafted illusion of the loving, devoted matriarch was vaporized in high-fidelity audio. She could not spin this. She could not blame my sensitivity. Her cruelty was now public record. Harold looked physically sick. His hands dropped from the iron bars as if the metal had suddenly burned him. He looked frantically toward the neighbors, his chest heaving, realizing that his pristine reputation was not just damaged, it was permanently eradicated. I looked past them to DeAndre. His dark eyes were wide, his strong posture rigid with absolute disgust. He had heard their side of the argument that night in the car, but hearing the sheer malice directed at a woman bleeding out on a hospital gurney hit him like a physical blow. He shook his head slowly, his jaw clenching so tight a muscle ticked prominently in his cheek. He looked at Amber not like she was his wife, but like she was a dangerous stranger he deeply regretted meeting. The look of pure revulsion on his face confirmed that his exit from this toxic family was final. I dropped the thick, heavy stack of legal documents onto the pristine concrete of my courtyard. Using the tip of my designer shoe, I slid the dossier smoothly under the 2-inch gap at the bottom of the iron gate. The thick stack of papers coasted across the pavement and stopped directly against Harold's scuffed leather loafers. "Pick it up, Harold," I commanded. He hesitated, but the sheer, uncompromising force of my authority compelled him to bend down. His trembling fingers grasped the heavy plastic binding. "Open it to page 1, I instructed. Harold flipped the heavy cover open. He stared at the top sheet of paper, his eyes scanning the bold red numbers printed across the summary page. "That is the aggregate total of your parasitic existence," I stated, my voice ringing out with clinical merciless detachment. $450,000. That is the exact amount of capital I have injected into your fake aristocratic lifestyle over the past 5 years. I quantified every single dollar. Flip the page. Harold swallowed hard, his hands shaking so violently the paper rattled. He turned to the next section. "Pages 2 through 40 contain every single transaction you authorized on my credit accounts," I explained, forcing them to face their own exorbitant greed. "Every luxury car lease payment, every country club due, every artisanal coffee Amber purchased while claiming she was too exhausted to find a real job, every high-end spa treatment Margaret demanded. It is a comprehensive line-by-line audit of your financial exploitation. You will notice that as of Tuesday morning, every single one of those accounts is permanently closed. The free ride is over." Amber let out a quiet, pathetic sob, wrapping her arms around her thin jacket as the reality of her utter bankruptcy washed over her. Margaret just stared at the ground, too humiliated by the public exposure of the audio recording to even attempt another defense. "Now flip to the very last section," I demanded. Harold fumbled with the thick stack, his breathing becoming shallow and erratic as he reached the heavy watermarked legal parchment at the back of the dossier. He read the bold heading at the top of the document, and all the remaining blood drained out of his face. "That is an official, legally binding 30-day notice to vacate," I announced, ensuring my voice carried to the neighbors still lingering on the sidewalk. I officially transferred the deed of that sprawling suburban house into an irrevocable blind trust. The trust is managed by an aggressive corporate law firm. They have a strict fiduciary duty to maximize assets, which means they do not legally allow tenants to live rent-free. Since you cannot afford the $6,000 monthly market rate, the trust is evicting you." Margaret let out a sharp, breathless wail. She clutched her cheap canvas tote bag against her chest, her knees buckling slightly. "You cannot evict us from our own home. We have nowhere to go." "It is not your home, Margaret," I corrected her sharply, dismantling her final delusion. "It has never been your home. It was my investment property, and I am liquidating it. If you do not remove your belongings within the 30-day window, the trust will hire a removal crew to place your items on the curb. If you attempt to vandalize the property, the trust will pursue severe criminal charges. You are currently dealing with a corporate entity that does not care about your tears." Harold dropped the dossier onto the pavement as if it weighed 1,000 pounds. He looked at me through the iron bars, completely broken, stripped of all his arrogant patriarchal authority. "You planned all of this," he whispered, his voice trembling with defeat. "You set this trap for us." "I did not set a trap, Harold. I simply stopped paying the toll for your abuse. You came here today expecting to manipulate a vulnerable daughter. You expected to cry, scream, and guilt-trip me into opening my wallet so you could go back to playing wealthy socialites at my expense. But the daughter you abused is gone. I am a risk analyst, and I have successfully neutralized the greatest liability in my portfolio. I took a deliberate step back from the gate, folding my hands neatly in front of me. I looked at the three of them, feeling absolutely nothing but the cool, refreshing breeze of total liberation. "You have all the documentation you need," I said, delivering my final, unwavering verdict. "The Bank of Siena is permanently closed. Do not ever return to this property." The silence that followed my final declaration was thick and suffocating, broken only by the sound of Margaret's ragged breathing and the rustle of the wind through the neighborhood trees. I remained standing just out of reach, watching the absolute devastation I had wrought. But the reckoning was not quite finished. My eyes shifted to DeAndre. He had remained completely motionless by the bumper of his sensible sedan throughout the entire confrontation. He had listened to the high-definition audio of his wife screaming that my life-threatening medical emergency was ruining her birthday. He had watched Harold, a man who constantly belittled him, drop to his knees over a dossier of stolen wealth. DeAndre finally moved. He did not rush. He walked with heavy, deliberate steps toward the center of the driveway, closing the distance between his vehicle and the iron gate where my family stood paralyzed. Amber turned toward him, her tear-streaked face lighting up with a sudden, desperate flare of hope. She reached out her trembling hands, expecting her husband to wrap his arms around her, to shield her from the brutal reality of her sudden poverty, to whisk her away from my fortress of consequences. DeAndre Amber sobbed, her voice cracking with pathetic relief. "Please tell her she cannot do this to us. Tell her she is being unreasonable. We need to go home. Take me home right now." DeAndre stopped exactly 3 feet away from her. He did not reach out to take her hands. He looked at Amber with an expression of such profound glacial disgust that she visibly shrank back against the iron bars. "You do not have a home with me, Amber," DeAndre stated, his deep voice carrying a terrifying quiet resonance that commanded absolute attention. "I packed all of your designer clothes, your expensive shoes, and every useless trinket you bought with your sister's blood money into those garbage bags in the trunk of my car. That is the only reason I drove here today. To drop off your luggage." Amber's jaw dropped. "DeAndre, what are you talking about? We are married. You are my husband. You have to take care of me." DeAndre shook his head slowly, looking at the woman he had married as if he were seeing a complete stranger. A parasite wearing a familiar mask. "I married a woman I thought was a struggling, misunderstood artist," DeAndre said, his words striking her with surgical precision. "I thought your family was just a little demanding. I worked 50-hour weeks at the physical therapy clinic to support us, while you complained about how hard your part-time public relations job was. I defended you to my own mother when she told me you were nothing but a spoiled, entitled brat." He pointed a firm finger at the thick financial dossier lying on the pavement at Harold's feet. "But I was wrong," DeAndre continued, his voice rising in volume, echoing with undeniable, righteous anger. "My mother was right. You are not a struggling artist, Amber. You are a leech. You and your parents have been bleeding your sister dry for half a decade. $450,000. While I was budgeting our grocery bills and driving a 6-year-old sedan, you were swiping Sienna's credit cards for $500 spa days and luxury champagne. You lied to me every single day of our marriage." Harold tried to intervene, attempting to salvage the last remaining pillar of their support system. "Now, DeAndre, let us be reasonable here. We are all going through a highly stressful transition. Family sticks together during financial hardships." "Do not you ever speak to me again," Harold, DeAndre snapped, whipping his head toward my father with a fierce, uncompromising glare. "You looked me in the eye at that stadium parking lot and told me to stay out of Wilson family business when Sienna was bleeding out on an operating table. You physically blocked my car. You told me her ruptured appendix was just a stunt. You are not a patriarch. You are a pathetic, broke con artist who could not even afford the shoes on your feet." Harold recoiled, utterly humiliated, stepping back as if DeAndre had physically struck him. DeAndre turned his attention back to Amber. She was trembling violently, realizing that her absolute last safety net was currently dissolving in front of her eyes. "DeAndre, please," Amber begged, dropping to her knees on the cold concrete, her hands clasping together in a frantic plea. "I will change. I will get a real job. I will stop spending. Just do not leave me here with them. We have no money. We have nowhere to go. I love you. You only love the lifestyle you thought I could eventually provide when your sister cut you off. DeAndre corrected her, his tone stripped of all remaining affection. You stood outside that stadium and screamed that your sister was a drama queen for almost dying on your birthday. That is not something a human being does. That is what a monster does. And I am not spending one more second of my life legally bound to a monster. DeAndre reached out with his right hand and gripped his left ring finger. With a swift, forceful tug, he slid the gold wedding band over his knuckle. Amber let out a gut-wrenching hysterical wail as the gold ring glinted in the afternoon light. I filed the divorce papers electronically this morning, DeAndre announced, his voice ringing with absolute unshakable finality. My lawyer will be serving you the physical copies wherever you end up sleeping tonight. Since we rent our apartment and have zero shared assets, it will be a very clean, very fast dissolution. Do not ever call my phone again. He tossed the gold wedding band directly onto the pavement. It hit the concrete with a sharp metallic clink, rolling a few inches before coming to a complete stop right next to the 50-page dossier of their financial crimes. DeAndre did not wait for a response. He turned his back on the sobbing, broken mess of the Wilson family. He walked purposefully to the trunk of his sedan, popped it open, and hauled out 3 massive, heavy-duty black trash bags. He unceremoniously dumped them onto the sidewalk, the plastic tearing slightly to reveal a jumble of Amber's expensive, heavily subsidized wardrobe. Without another glance at the wreckage he was leaving behind, DeAndre walked to the driver's side of his car. Before getting in, he looked up at me standing behind the iron gate. He offered a slow, respectful nod, a silent acknowledgement of the war we had both just survived. I nodded back, honoring his clean, decisive exit. DeAndre got into his sedan, started the engine, and drove away without looking in his rearview mirror. I stood in my secure courtyard, watching the ultimate devastation of the people who had tried to destroy me. Amber was curled into a fetal position on the sidewalk, weeping hysterically over a pile of trash bags and a discarded wedding ring. Margaret was leaning heavily against the brick pillar, her face buried in her hands, completely shattered by the public irredeemable loss of her social standing. Harold stared blankly at the departing taillights of DeAndre's car, a ruined, bankrupt man who had finally run out of victims to exploit. The financial audit was complete, the social execution was finished, but the final judgment was yet to be delivered. The rhythmic, methodical tapping of a wooden cane echoed across the pristine concrete of my courtyard. The sound was sharp and deliberate, cutting through the residual sounds of Amber's pathetic sobbing on the public sidewalk. I did not have to turn around to know who was approaching the iron gates. I simply stepped slightly to the right, opening the visual stage for the true patriarch of the Wilson family. Grandpa Silas stepped out from the shadow of the portico and into the cool afternoon sunlight. He was impeccably dressed in his tailored tweed suit, his silver hair perfectly combed, standing remarkably tall for an 80-year-old man. He walked with the fierce, imposing presence of a veteran corporate litigator, entering a courtroom to deliver a closing argument. Harold gasped. His hands, which had dropped in complete defeat moments ago, suddenly flew back up to grip the wrought iron bars. The absolute despair on my father's face instantly vanished, replaced by a sudden, sickening surge of delusional hope. In Harold's greedy, frantic mind, his ultimate safety net had just arrived. He believed Silas was entirely oblivious to the financial slaughter that had just occurred. He believed the frail, senile old man act that Silas had been perfecting for the past decade. Dad Harold shouted, his voice cracking with a desperate, manic relief. "Thank God you are here. Thank God you are inside. Sienna has completely lost her mind. She is having some kind of psychotic breakdown. She froze all of our bank accounts and sent us a fake eviction notice. She is trying to throw your own son out onto the street." Silas stopped right beside me. He rested both hands on the smooth brass head of his cane and stared through the bars at his son. He did not say a single word. He just observed Harold with cold, clinical detachment. Harold misread the silence as confusion. He pressed his face closer to the metal, his eyes wide and pleading. "Dad, you have to do something," Harold commanded, trying to summon a tone of righteous indignation. You are the head of this family. You need to put her in her place right now. Tell her to open this gate. Tell her to restore our access to the credit lines. She is starving us out. She just let DeAndre drive away and leave Amber sitting on the pavement with garbage bags. Margaret, sensing a potential rescue, immediately flanked her husband. She wiped her smeared mascara and put on her best, most manipulative performance of the devoted, victimized daughter-in-law. "Silas, please." Margaret whimpered, her voice trembling with manufactured fragility. "We are completely destitute. The country club humiliated us. We have no electricity. We have no food. Sienna has orchestrated this entire nightmare because she is holding a grudge over a simple misunderstanding at a concert. You know how we have always respected you. You know how much we value family. You have to force her to stop this madness." When Silas continued to stare at them in absolute unyielding silence, Harold's panic began to mutate. The immediate demand for me to unlock the gate shifted to his ultimate long-standing obsession: the ancestral Wilson estate, the 300 acres of prime commercial real estate that Harold had been aggressively trying to rip from his father's hands for 10 years. "Listen to me, Dad," Harold pleaded, his voice dropping to a frantic conspiratorial register. "If she will not open the gate, if she refuses to fix the accounts, then we need to execute the backup plan today. We are facing total bankruptcy. I have zero liquid capital. You have to sell the land." Harold gripped the bars so tightly, his knuckles turned completely white. He was practically salivating at the thought of the multi-million-dollar property. "You have been sitting on those 300 acres for decades," Harold insisted, his greed completely overriding his shame. "Developers have been making massive offers. You need to sign the commercial development contracts immediately. If you liquidate the ancestral estate, we can generate enough capital to buy a new house. We can secure Amber's future. We will not need Sienna's toxic money anymore. You can save our legacy, Dad. You owe it to your bloodline to protect us from ruin. Sign the papers and bail us out." Amber pulled herself up from the concrete, abandoning her pile of trash bags. She stumbled to the gate, pressing her tear-stained face against the iron. "Please, Grandpa," Amber sobbed, reaching a shaking hand through the gap in the bars. "DeAndre took everything. I have absolutely nothing left. You are our only hope. You have to sell the land and save us." They stood there on the public sidewalk, a trio of broken, bankrupt parasites begging the man they had secretly mocked for years to sacrifice his lifelong legacy just to fund their vanity. They believed Silas would cave to their emotional extortion. They believed family obligation would compel him to hand over his multi-million-dollar estate to cover their outstanding spa bills and country club tabs. I glanced sideways at my grandfather. The physical transformation was remarkable. The slight stoop in his shoulders vanished entirely. His jaw locked with iron certainty. The brilliant, ruthless attorney who had dominated boardrooms for 40 years was fully awakened. He did not look at his son with love or pity. He looked at him with absolute, unadulterated revulsion. Silas took a deep breath of the crisp afternoon air, tightening his grip on his cane. The trap was fully sprung, and it was time to drop the guillotine. I waited for the frail, trembling voice that Harold had grown accustomed to over the last decade. Instead, what came out of my grandfather's mouth was the booming, commanding baritone of a man who used to tear opposing corporate counsel to shreds before lunch. "You are a pathetic excuse for a man," Harold Silas declared. The words struck the iron gate like a physical blow, carrying the weight of absolute, unvarnished truth. Harold flinched, his eyes darting frantically. "Dad, your medication must be off. You are confused. The stress of Sienna's breakdown is getting to you. You need to sit down before you hurt yourself." "I am not confused, and I am certainly not medicated," Silas countered, taking a purposeful step closer to the bars. He did not lean on his cane for support. He held it like a scepter. "I have not been confused for a single second of the last 10 years. I played the part of a senile, frail old man because it was the only way to get you to drop your guard. It was the only way to get you to show your true colors. I wanted to see exactly how you operated when you thought no one capable of stopping you was paying attention." Margaret gasped, her hand flying to her throat, her cheap canvas tote bag dropping to the pavement. "Silas, you pretended. You lied to us. I observed Silas corrected her sharply, his dark eyes locking onto her pale face. I sat quietly at every holiday dinner, every lavish country club event, and every suburban barbecue that Sienna paid for. I watched you parade around in designer clothes, drinking imported wine, acting like self-made aristocrats. And I watched how you systematically exploited, belittled, and drained the only person in this family who actually possesses a shred of the Wilson work ethic. Harold's face turned a mottled, sickly shade of purple. The realization that his father had been running a decade-long counterintelligence operation right under his nose was completely short-circuiting his brain. "Dad, we took care of you. We visited you at the facility every month. We made sure you were comfortable. You visited me to hand me predatory commercial development contracts," Silas fired back, his voice echoing off the brick facades of my wealthy neighbors' homes. "You brought me stale cookies and shoved liquidation agreements in my face, hoping my eyesight was poor enough to sign away the ancestral estate. You wanted to pave over 300 acres of prime real estate just to pay off the massive hidden debts you accumulated trying to keep up with Margaret's insatiable vanity. You never cared about my comfort. You were just waiting for me to die." Amber, still shivering on the concrete next to her garbage bags, tried to leverage her tears. "Grandpa, please. We are your blood. Sienna is just being vindictive because of a stupid misunderstanding at a concert. You have to protect us. We have nowhere else to go." Silas shifted his piercing gaze to Amber. The sheer contempt in his eyes made her shrink back against the iron bars. "You are 28 years old, Amber. You have never worked a genuine day in your life. You treat your sister like a bank teller, and you treated your own husband like a chauffeur. You are not a victim. You are the byproduct of Harold and Margaret's catastrophic failure as parents. Do not look at me for sympathy. I have none left to give." Silas turned his attention back to Harold, leaning slightly forward, his presence entirely dominating the space. "You talk about family legacy, Harold. You talk about protecting the bloodline. Let us discuss exactly how you protect your bloodline. 3 weeks ago, your eldest daughter called you from a hospital gurney. She was facing emergency surgery. Her organs were shutting down. She begged you to secure her 4-year-old twins so they would not be handed over to strangers." Margaret tried to interrupt, stepping forward with her hands raised defensively. "We were at the stadium, Silas. The traffic was impossible. We did not understand the severity of the situation." Silence. Silas roared, shutting her down with absolute terrifying authority. "You were sitting in a VIP parking lot drinking champagne paid for by the very woman bleeding out on an operating table. You abandoned her on her own dime. You called her a nuisance. You told her to hire a babysitter so you would not miss the opening act of a pop concert. You were perfectly willing to let Child Protective Services take your own grandchildren rather than sacrifice a single night of stolen luxury. That is not a misunderstanding. That is moral bankruptcy." Harold gripped the bars again, desperate to regain some sliver of control over his rapidly disintegrating reality. "That was a mistake, Dad. We panicked. But you cannot let Sienna leave us homeless. You cannot let her humiliate us like this in front of the entire city. You have to sell the land and bail us out. It is the only way to save the Wilson name." "The Wilson name does not need saving from Sienna," Silas stated, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "The Wilson name needs saving from you." Silas stood entirely straight, looking down at his son, with the absolute finality of a judge delivering a death sentence. "I spent my entire life building a legacy of hard work, legal integrity, and financial responsibility. I thought I had failed when I watched you squander your career and drown in debt. But then I watched Sienna. I watched her build a highly successful career in risk management. I watched her buy your house, lease your cars, and fund your entire fraudulent existence without ever asking for a single ounce of gratitude." He pointed his cane directly at Harold's chest through the iron gate. "You are not a patriarch, Harold. You are a parasite. All three of you are parasites. You attached yourselves to a strong, capable host, and you sucked her dry until she finally developed the antidote." "Dad, please." Harold whimpered, the last vestiges of his pride completely evaporating on the concrete. "We have absolutely nothing. We have zero liquid capital. If you do not sell the estate and give us the proceeds, we are going to end up in a homeless shelter by the end of the week. Then you better start packing light, Silas replied with brutal, icy precision. Because I am not selling a single square inch of the ancestral estate to fund your pathetic lifestyle. You are never seeing a dime of my money. You are never stepping foot on my property. You demanded I put Sienna in her place, Harold, and that is exactly what I'm going to do. But you are fundamentally mistaken about where her place actually is. Silas reached down to the heavy leather briefcase resting by his feet. He popped the brass latches with a sharp, echoing click that made Harold flinch. Reaching inside, my grandfather retrieved a thick stack of watermarked legal parchment bound by a heavy blue seal. He held it up to the afternoon light, ensuring Harold had a perfect, unobstructed view of the official county stamps across the top page. You spent the last 10 years waiting for me to die so you could inherit the Wilson estate, Silas announced, his voice ringing with absolute, undeniable authority. You assumed the laws of succession would automatically drop 300 acres of prime commercial real estate into your lap. You thought my $15 million property was your ultimate safety net. But as a former corporate litigator, I despise leaving things to chance. And I certainly do not leave multi-million-dollar assets to parasites. Harold pressed his face so hard against the iron gate that the metal dug into his skin. Dad, what is that? Harold choked out, his eyes glued to the documents in Silas's hand. What did you sign? This is an irrevocable deed of transfer, Silas stated, dropping the heaviest financial hammer of the afternoon. Executed, notarized, and officially filed with the county clerk at 9 o'clock this morning. I have entirely bypassed you, Harold. You are officially disinherited. I have transferred the absolute legal ownership of the entire $15 million Wilson estate directly to Sienna. Margaret let out a strangled, breathless gasp, her knees buckling as she slid down the iron bars to the concrete sidewalk. Amber just stared, her mouth hanging open in silent, catastrophic shock. But my grandfather was not finished. The deed also stipulates the establishment of a generational trust. Silas continued, his gaze shifting to me with profound, unwavering respect. Upon Sienna's passing, which I hope is many decades from now, the land and all its accumulated wealth will transfer equally to Mason and Mia. My great-grandchildren will inherit the legacy you tried to squander. They will have their college tuitions, their first homes, and their futures entirely secured by the very land you wanted to pave over for a quick country club payout. You are getting absolutely nothing. You cannot do this, Harold screamed, his voice shattering into a hysterical, high-pitched wail. I am your son. It is my birthright. You cannot give my inheritance to her. I will contest it. I will drag this through probate court for years. I will prove you were manipulated. You will do absolutely nothing, Silas countered, his tone dropping to a lethal, icy calm. Because you do not have a single dollar left to hire an attorney. You cannot even afford the filing fees. Furthermore, attached to this transfer is a comprehensive medical evaluation from 3 independent board-certified neurologists confirming my absolute mental competency. I also recorded a high-definition video statement explicitly detailing your financial incompetence and my deliberate choice to disinherit you. If you even attempt to bring this before a judge, you will be laughed out of the courtroom and sanctioned for filing a frivolous lawsuit. Harold collapsed against the gate, sliding down to the pavement right next to Margaret. The patriarch of the Wilson family was now sitting in the dirt, completely bankrupt, publicly humiliated, and legally stripped of his entire ancestry. His $15 million safety net had just been handed directly to the daughter he had treated like a disposable asset. I looked down at the 3 of them trembling on the public sidewalk. The financial audit was officially closed. The accounts were settled. Officer Briggs, I said, my voice clear and completely devoid of pity. The conversation is over. Please clear the perimeter. Officer Briggs stepped forward, his hand resting firmly on his radio. You heard the homeowner? He boomed, gesturing down the street. Vacate the perimeter immediately or you will be leaving in the back of a police cruiser. I turned my back on them. I did not watch them drag their garbage bags down the affluent sidewalk. I did not watch Harold's final, pathetic realization that his legacy was reduced to dust. I simply linked my arm through my grandfather's and we walked back inside my warm, secure home. The heavy iron gates clicked shut permanently, locking the Wilson family out of my life. 6 months later, the absolute reality of their financial liquidation had fully settled into their daily lives. Harold and Margaret, once the self-proclaimed royalty of the suburban elite, were forced to move into a cramped two-bedroom Section 8 apartment complex on the industrial outskirts of the city. The thin, poorly insulated walls offered absolutely no protection from the constant noise of their neighbors. Their sprawling catered dinner parties were replaced by cheap microwave meals eaten on a scratched laminate table. Harold spent his days sitting in a worn armchair staring blankly at a small television, utterly disconnected from the wealthy golf buddies who had instantly abandoned him when his country club tab bounced. Margaret, stripped of her designer wardrobe and premium salon appointments, rarely left the apartment. The women she used to impress at luxury boutiques had completely ostracized her, treating her sudden, undeniable poverty like a highly contagious disease. They were trapped in a miserable, suffocating existence, entirely funded by their own profound arrogance. Amber experienced the most poetic descent into reality. Stripped of her fake public relations job and legally divorced by DeAndre, she had no choice but to enter the actual workforce. The golden child who used to spend my money on expensive artisanal coffees and mock service workers for being beneath her was now wearing a polyester uniform stained with grease. She worked grueling 10-hour shifts as a waitress at a high-volume minimum-wage diner. Her designer heels were replaced by cheap, slip-resistant sneakers that offered no support for her aching feet. Her days consisted of carrying heavy trays, cleaning up spilled milkshakes, and enduring the impatient demands of rude customers. The sheer, exhausting reality of manual labor wiped away every ounce of her former entitlement. As for my own portfolio, it was yielding the absolute highest returns of my entire life. I sat back in a plush white lounge chair, feeling the warm, tropical sun on my face. The gentle sound of the Pacific Ocean lapping against the pristine sands of a private beach in Maui filled the air. A few yards away, Mason and Mia were excitedly building a massive sandcastle, their joyous laughter carrying over the gentle ocean breeze. Grandpa Silas sat under a large umbrella next to me, a colorful tropical drink in his hand, looking 20 years younger and absolutely at peace. My surgical scars had completely healed. My bank accounts were fully secure. The $15 million ancestral estate was safely managed in an airtight trust for my children's future. I had successfully excised the toxic liabilities from my life and protected the assets that actually mattered. I took a slow sip of my iced water, watching my twins chase a small crab down the shoreline. I smiled, feeling a profound, unshakable calm settling deep into my bones. Freedom is not cheap, but the peace is priceless. The story of Sienna offers a profound and unflinching lesson. Biological relation does not entitle anyone to an endless supply of your resources, your peace, or your life. For too long, society has blindly peddled the toxic narrative that family is family, implying that we must endlessly endure manipulation, neglect, and financial exploitation simply because we share DNA with our abusers. Sienna's harrowing experience being abandoned at death's door while her family prioritized a pop concert shatters this dangerous myth and boldly redefines what true loyalty actually means. The ultimate takeaway is that establishing ironclad boundaries is not an act of cruelty. It is the absolute highest form of self-preservation. When we allow parasitic relationships to continuously drain our emotional and financial reserves, we are not being noble or righteous. We are merely subsidizing our own destruction. Sienna teaches us that true liberation begins the precise moment we stop trying to buy the unconditional love that toxic people are fundamentally incapable of giving. By treating her abusers like the toxic liabilities they were, she successfully reclaimed her power, her wealth, and her children's future. Furthermore, this intense narrative powerfully reminds us that the family we actively choose, the people who show up during our absolute darkest hours, who fiercely protect our peace rather than exploit our hard-earned success, is the only family that genuinely matters. Healing requires the tremendous courage to walk away from those who only value us for what they can extract. Freedom is never cheap, and it often requires making difficult, unflinching decisions to protect the beautiful life we have worked so hard to build from the ground up. Take an honest look at your own relationships today and dare to cut the cord on anyone who treats your existence as a mere transaction.